Welcome into the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Milewski joined by Jim Leitner. The first Fighting Saints Report of March as Dubuque ended the month of February kind of the way they've ended just about every single month on a high note. There haven't been many down notes for Dubuque, but outside of the month of December, this was yet another month where they won 2 games to finish it off. Friday night over Sioux City, a 4-3 victory. Saturday over Sioux Falls, a 4-2 victory, sweeping the season series with both Sioux City and Sioux Falls, and most importantly for Dubuque, maintaining that gap that separates them from a first round, or separates them from having to play in the first round, I should say, and taking care of business on home ice was the biggest key once again.
No question about it, and it's kind of fun at this time of the year where you don't have to really scoreboard watch. The Fighting Saints are pretty firmly in that number 2 spot, and you don't have to worry about the teams, who are chasing you. You don't have to kind of hope that they lose, or, there's really no scoreboard watching. You're in a good spot. You can take care of your own business. And, that's exactly what the Fighting Saints did this weekend. They took care of business against two pretty good teams. I mean, Sioux City is a team that's in last place in the Western Conference, but I think they're a lot better than their record shows. And, they have some good defensive structure. They just don't have a lot of offensive finish. So, and as obviously Sioux Falls is a team that's been really on a good roll here since since beginning of December. So, 2 good quality teams, and good for the Fighting Saints for taking care of business and again adding to that cushion.
Yeah, you had 2 teams heading into the weekend in completely different directions, and they even swapped some players right before this weekend series. Sioux Falls sending a couple younger players to Sioux City for their top 2 scorers in Sam Stang and Ian Malcolmson. And so we saw a Sioux City team that, and you mentioned at the top of the broadcast, really has nothing to lose the rest of the season. They're playing with house money. They're building for next year and the future. And they came out with a pretty gutsy effort. I thought they made things difficult for Dubuque on the offensive side for the majority of the night. 4-3 victory. Secondary scoring was the ultimate difference in that game, but definitely a tougher matchup than it would have been on paper.
Yeah, and you do see that quite often. You see a team that makes a deal at the deadline, and it kind of looks like a white flag trade, and like they're giving up on their season. And a lot of times you'll see a team that's in that situation will kind of go on a little bit of a run because, as you mentioned, they don't have a lot of pressure on them. And the other good thing is you have some younger players who are basically their future are playing for roles the following season, and it's really an audition for them. And again, I think the big thing is they don't have pressure on them. And then you come into a place like Dubuque, and Dubuque's expected to win. Dubuque is a team that's in second place in the Eastern Conference and second place overall, and is supposed to win that hockey game. Mm-hmm. So there's not a lot of pressure on you, and like you said, you're playing with house money, and you can kind of relax and try some things. And I thought Sioux City did. Again, I think their defensive structure is not bad. Mm-hmm. You look at that's kind of been the hallmark of that team. They just, like I said, they don't have the kind of offensive finish that would get them in a position where they could qualify for the playoffs. But again, a really good gutsy effort by the Musketeers, and made it a much better hockey game than a lot of people probably thought it was going to be.
That was win number 8 in a row on home ice for the Fighting Saints. You move to Saturday night, and before we touch on the Hockey for All theme to end the month of February, looking at the hockey game itself, strong first period for the Fighting Saints, and during that first period, it really felt like Sioux Falls was the winner because Dubuque dominated and couldn't score anything. And you felt, this might be one of those games where Sioux Falls is able to capitalize on that takeover in the second period. But credit to the Fighting Saints, it did not take long for them to put one in the back of the net. They laid the groundwork in the first period, started getting the payout in the second period. 21 seconds in, Dylan Jackson scored the goal, and then they get 3 more, a dominant second period. That was the difference in that game.
Yeah, I do think the league has to have some sort of regulation where you can't play Sioux City and Sioux Falls back-to-back because it makes us tongue-tied. That happened all weekend, and that's kind of crazy. But you're exactly right. And I think one thing that I really like about this Saints team is, maybe in the past couple years, they'd have a first period like that where they dominate and they didn't have anything to show for it. and it was almost like, geez, what do we have to do? And then the other team would come and they'd score a goal, and then you're chasing the game. But this team has a lot of poise, and this team it doesn't get rattled by situations like that where they don't score even though they're dominating. And, I thought getting that quick start in the second period really was the difference maker. And, obviously Cherometta scoring a couple goals there in the second period, that was huge as well. But that's what I like about this team. If you have a big period and you don't score, it doesn't seem, nothing really seems to bother them. There's really no circumstance or no situation that really bothers this team. And, for them to pop a couple quick ones real early, that really settled things down and got the big crowd into it.
The big crowd you mentioned, that was one of the nice pieces of a game on Saturday night that really had it all. You had the big crowd, you had the great theme, you obviously had the win. But Hockey for All Night, Hockey for All Month finishes, sponsored by John Deere, Dubuque Works, second annual Hockey for All Month. And as you touched on in the broadcast, we've been talking about it all month long. But it was nice to see this continue, gain a little bit more steam with the Dubuque Community School District hopping on board for year 2, and for the Fighting Saints to continue to be the catalyst in the USHL for promoting diversity and inclusion. And it was a nice way to end it with the biggest crowd since 2017 in the building for Hockey for All Night.
Yeah, and what I like about it is it's really a simple thing. It's just hockey for all. You're not singling out one group. You're not trying to encourage one particular group or anybody. It's everybody, and that's what's really neat about it. And it's not just about. I don't think it's just about hockey. I don't think it's about the USHL. I think it's about the entire community, and it's a great message that the Fighting Saints are sending to the entire community. And I think over the last 10 or 15 years, what I've really appreciated about this team is, bringing awareness to Military Appreciation Night, Breast Cancer Night, men's health initiatives. Those are a lot of things that, many, many years ago were maybe taboo, or you really didn't talk about them, or you really didn't support them. But, I think a team like the Fighting Saints embracing Hockey for All and all those other initiatives is really great for the community and makes it a lot more acceptable. And not only do you raise a lot of money for the United Way in this case, but you bring a lot of attention to it. And I think that's probably the better benefactor of this, is that people are talking about. They're talking about inclusion. They're talking about diversity. And geez, if the Fighting Saints can do it, then I can do it at my workplace, downtown or whatever. And I think that's what's really great. And the Fighting Saints they want to be a really good community member, and I think this is a great way to be a good community member.
Hockey for All Month, second annual Hockey for All Month, sponsored by John Deere, and for all signs pointing to this continuing for some time, hopefully, and the message a good one to continue to spread.
Yeah, I don't know why it wouldn't. And it's kind of funny when I was talking to Luke Robinson this weekend about Hockey for All, and it's kind of interesting. Hockey players are like this anyway. If you talk to these guys in September or October, they're all about getting everybody involved. They have such a passion for the sport, and they love to spread the game of hockey to people who don't necessarily get to see it very often or aren't exposed to it. And so Luke was like, we kind of almost don't need a month like this, because that's the way we are all the time. But it's like second nature to them, that they want to go out and spread the word, and get out into elementary schools, and get out into the boys club and the girls club of Dubuque and spread the word. So, but it is. You do need it, because right. It's a great way to spread the word, and it create a lot of attention towards it. I'm not saying Luke didn't want to have it, but he's just saying this is right. Something that it's like second nature to them. It's like you don't have to pull teeth to ask them to do it, because they're on board, and that's something that they enjoy and something that they would do normally. 3,104 in attendance for that victory over Sioux Falls. And before we take our first break, what this did for Dubuque this weekend is, again, continuing a home win streak, which is now at 9 games in a row on home ice, meaning that's their third longest
in the Tier 1 era. 11 wins is the next plateau at home, and then a really tough mark to get to, 15 straight at home. That was the 12-13 team began the season with 15 straight on home ice. But for the Fighting Saints, this just continued to plant themselves firmly in the number 2 spot. Right now, with a month and a half left in the season, Team USA and Green Bay, who has now vaulted up to a tie for third in points, they're 14 points back, both of those teams. Essentially, Dubuque would have to lose 3/4 of their games the rest of the way, and one of those teams would have to win probably 80% of their games to make this flip. It just doesn't seem like it's going to be happening in Dubuque. Pretty much is a certainty to get a first-round bye.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's kind of similar with, I don't know if Dubuque can catch Chicago for first place. It's a similar situation, but I don't see this team really going into a big funk. They might have a weekend or two where they struggle, or a road trip where they don't play as well as they'd like. But I don't see either Team USA or Green Bay making up 14 points or 12 points or whatever it is. It's not very likely. And the Fighting Saints have been going on all cylinders. They've had great balance, great depth, great goaltending, great defense. You add those all up, and it doesn't really lend itself to seeing a long, prolonged losing streak. So Saints are in a really good situation right now, and now it's a matter of really fine-tuning things and getting continuing this momentum going into the stretch run and into the playoffs.
7 weeks left in the regular season, and the Fighting Saints sitting comfortably 65 points. That is the second most in the USHL and second most in the Eastern Conference. We will take a break. When we come back, looking at the playoff picture in both the East and the West and some of the results from this weekend. Welcome back to the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Milewski and Jim Leitner here on Monday, the first week of March, and the Fighting Saints comfortably in second place in the Eastern Conference, as we just touched upon, but the standings are shifting every single weekend, and the biggest mover this week, the Green Bay Gamblers. They are up to 4th in the Eastern Conference, which is where they've been for some time, but the points have suddenly shifted in their favor because now they have 51, tied with the NTDP. Green Bay played 3 games this weekend, and they won all 3, and that included a sweep of the Omaha Lancers, who were previously unbeaten in the month of February.
Yeah, no doubt about it, and they still have a couple games in hand on Youngstown, which is chasing the Gamblers, and I thought that was probably the story of the weekend, going out to Omaha and sweeping them. Omaha had won 10 in a row? 11 in a row, and they were playing with so much confidence and really getting the job done. And, I think that's a good signature weekend for the Gamblers. I think we've talked about it for probably since October, where, with such a veteran group in Green Bay, it was just a matter of when are they going to really turn it on and really hit their stride. And I think this weekend might have been that big signature weekend that they needed to really kick things into overdrive and make a good push. Now, do they have enough to maybe catch Dubuque? I don't think so. I think they're still far enough back there. But, again, if you get on a roll and you get some momentum going into March and April, who knows? You might be able to make a little run in the playoffs.
Speaking of the playoffs, a team that has been in the playoff picture for the entire season, Waterloo, they snapped back into the winning column with a couple big and decisive victories over teams. One team they probably should beat in Youngstown. They beat them 5-1 on Saturday, but then a very impressive victory over the U18s on Friday. They beat them 5-1 in Plymouth, and this is a Waterloo Blackhawks team, that was the U17s, I should say. I believe it was the U17s on Friday. I'll take a look at it real quick, but it was the U17s. Still impressive nonetheless, 5-1. And for the Blackhawks, I think a much-needed weekend overall because they were 4-5-1 in their last 10 heading into this. Omaha was, again, 11 straight right on their tails. With Omaha losing twice and Waterloo winning twice, they've created a little bit more of a gap once again. It's 4 points, but it's not. It doesn't feel as close as it did just a week ago.
No, and Omaha actually got within a point. Dummy me, I was saying that I thought Omaha was going to easily overtake them, but no, it's a big weekend for Waterloo, and I think that's first of all the Youngstown victory. That's a revenge victory for them because they just got beat by the Phantoms just a week ago or 2 weeks ago. So big bounce back win to beat Youngstown, a team that they probably should beat, and the U17s have really been struggling since they were on that stretch where they won like 10 or 11 in a row around the holiday break, and since then they've really fallen off the map, and so a good week for you. And that's a difficult trip. You go to Youngstown and you go to Plymouth, Michigan. That's a tough road trip, and they were able to get 4 points out of there. That's a big confidence booster for the Blackhawks, I'm sure.
A lot of other series this weekend, a lot of splits, so not much change in the standings with those series. But the one series you also take a look at this weekend that jumps off the page, maybe for other reasons than just the result, was Fargo and Muskegon. 50 penalties in 2 games, 140 penalty minutes in 2 games, and a coach ejection, which you don't see that often. I mean, that was a lot going on at the Mercy Health Arena in Muskegon.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And, was Tanner Edwards involved in any of those? I'm sure.
Tanner Edwards had 14 penalty minutes on Friday night. I think he might have only had 2 on Saturday.
It's kind of those are 2 teams that they're physical teams, and they're tough teams, or they want to play a tough style of game, especially with Tanner Edwards in Muskegon. That's his identity, and he really likes to play that game. It kind of doesn't surprise me. I'm gonna go out on a limb. Every once in a while, it seems like every year around this time, you do see something like this happen. It's kind of the dog days of the season. It's kind of a grind. And people kind of start to get annoyed with each other. I was kind of surprised that it happened on Friday night. Usually it's the second night of the 2, but I was kind of surprised that it happened on Friday night. But again, they're 2 teams that are, trying to make a statement. In Muskegon's case, they really want to solidify their spot in the Eastern Conference playoffs. Fargo's a team that still, I think, has ideas about maybe getting that number 2 seed. So it doesn't necessarily surprise me, but the coach ejection, that is a little bit off the script.
Yeah, both coaches. Mike Hamilton got a warning in the first period, and then Pierre-Paul Lamoureux for Fargo got ejected in the third period. And I rewatched the broadcast because I wanted to see exactly what happened, and there wasn't enough that you could see on the broadcast and glean from that information to know exactly what was said, what happened, obviously. But what you did see was after Pierre-Paul Lamoureux got ejected, Mike Hamilton called the referees over to the bench, and he actually was complaining, asking why he was ejected. He was fighting for Lamoureux to come back in the game. He didn't think it was warranted. So that's very interesting. I think the referees might have been in over their head, it seemed, that weekend. 70 penalty minutes on Friday and then 70 penalty minutes on Saturday again. So clearly the teams, all the penalties that were doled out on Friday did little to dissuade the repeat offenders on Saturday. It was a physical series. But you're right, Fargo is a team that is planted in a pretty comfortable position right now in the Western Conference. They're 11 points out of the 7 seed, which is the first seed to not make it. They're in 3rd right now. They're 6 points behind Omaha in 2nd. But Muskegon is a team that every single weekend is fighting for their playoff lives. They're 4 points up on 7th seeded Cedar Rapids, but Cedar Rapids still maintains those 2 games in hand. So really, if Cedar Rapids takes care of business, it's a virtual tie between Muskegon and Cedar Rapids. So every week right now for Muskegon is a playoff game.
Yeah, and Cedar Rapids, too, I think that's a team that it has a plus goal differential, whereas Muskegon does not. So, and Cedar Rapids is such a feisty team. They're despite all their injuries, they haven't gone away quietly. So you're exactly right about Muskegon. They have to scrap and they have to battle. And it's still a younger team, the Lumberjacks are, but they do have some grit to them. And like we said, Tanner Edwards is a guy who likes to mix things up a little bit and get your guys play with a little bit more courage when they have a guy like him on the roster. And but yeah, the Jacks really need to go on some sort of run here to solidify their spot and again make some momentum going into the playoffs.
The Muskegon Lumberjacks, right now the 6th seed in the East. The Sioux Falls Stampede, the 6th seed in the West. Sioux Falls 5 points up on the Des Moines Buccaneers and no games in hand. That's a Des Moines team that really has slipped. They were middle of the pack for a long time, but over the last 3 or 4 last 3 or 4 weeks, they haven't won much, and now they find themselves not just on the outside looking in, but starting to slip further and further away of being in the discussion by the end of this month of March.
Well, and you look, Sioux Falls is the exact opposite. After really a rugged start, they've been outstanding since the start of December, and you really, if you're Des Moines, you can't afford to be win 2, lose 2, win 2, lose 2. You have to go on a little bit of a stretch to make sure you're going to get in. And I think, in Dubuque's case, Dubuque has done a nice job of creating a nice margin for error. They can have a rough weekend and not worry about it. A team like Des Moines, and they really don't have any kind of margin for error now, especially with the way Sioux Falls has been playing. And I like the way Sioux Falls has been trending, and Des Moines, again, it's just a team that just hasn't found that consistency. And I don't know if they've really had it at all the entire season. I mean, they had a nice start. I mean, a decent start to begin the season, but they never really went on any kind of big run.
Looking at the standings a little bit more, Chicago, the first team to clinch. They did it this weekend. They clinch at least a playoff spot, and just based on how they're playing and the separation between them and 1 and 2, it's pretty easy to assume that they're going to clinch a bye in the first round. And like you said, Jim, they're probably going to be the number 1 seed. They're 14 points up on Dubuque. And again, Dubuque has 2 points in hand, but even if they win both those games, Chicago is still 10 points up on the Fighting Saints. And this is a team that hasn't lost more than twice in a row this season, and that's only happened twice. It just doesn't feel like a lead that they're going to relinquish. But the real question is, how high can they go in terms of points? Their max points, and that would mean they would have to win the rest of their games, which probably isn't likely, but their max points is 109, and the USHL record is 98, which means they can afford to drop 9 points in the last 7 weeks and tie the USHL record for points.
Yeah, I don't know. Logic tells you that that's not going to happen, that they're not going to get that many points. But, geez, the way they've been playing, it wouldn't surprise me at all if they did that. The thing that really jumps off the stat sheet to me, look at that goal differential they have, plus 100. Yeah. You're 47 games into the season, and you're at plus 100. Mm-hmm. They've scored 229, and they've allowed 129. That is, to me, that's phenomenal. And defensively, it's not like they're just, an offensive juggernaut. Defensively, they're pretty good too. I mean, 129 is among the leaders in the USHL, top 3, top 4. Mm-hmm. So they're getting it done on both ends of the ice, and it's a freight train that I don't know if anybody's going to be able to stop.
Anderson Cup-wise, they are running away with it. They are, again, 14 points ahead of the next closest team, and their magic number to clinch the Anderson Cup is 20, which means that any combination of Chicago wins or teams below them in the standings losing, Dubuque and Waterloo being the next closest. So Dubuque is really the team to watch for now, the second seed losing and Chicago winning, they will clinch the Anderson Cup. And again, it just seems like a foregone conclusion that all of this will happen, just a matter of how many wins and how many points Chicago finishes the season with. And then before we take our break, quickly looking at that Western Conference, we touched on it a bit. Waterloo is 4 points up on Omaha, who's in second place. And Omaha has one fewer game the rest of the season. I know you were on the Omaha train last weekend, but as we look at Waterloo and Omaha, in your gut right now with Waterloo 16 games remaining, Omaha 15, who are you taking at the end of the season? I
think I'm still on that Omaha train. They've been 8-1-1 in their last 10. Waterloo, despite winning both games this weekend, they're still 5-5-0 over the last 10. I just think I like the way that Omaha's been trending. Is something that's been going on for probably the last month and a half, and they've just been trending a little bit better than Waterloo. And Waterloo's still a good team. They're still going to get top 2 seed, no doubt about it. But I just like the way Omaha's been trending, and even though they have one more game played, I still think they're going to be able to catch Waterloo and pass them.
So the Waterloo Blackhawks, the Omaha Lancers, a clear 1-2 in the West, and same in the East. Chicago and Dubuque, the clear 1-2, a little bit more separation between those two teams. When we come back, speaking of Chicago and Dubuque, we'll preview the weekend series between those two teams and also look at a couple big games the rest of the month of March for the Fighting Saints. Welcome back to the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Milewski and Jim Leitner here this Monday, March 2nd. And as we look forward to the upcoming weekend, the biggest series by far is a battle of the top two teams in the Eastern Conference. It features the Dubuque Fighting Saints, another home and home with the Chicago Steel. Last time we saw these two teams play a fantastic series towards the beginning of January. Chicago won both games. In Chicago, it was a 2-0 shutout for Victor Ostman. A breakaway goal from Eric Mittendorf in the beginning of the second period and an empty net goal from Gunnar Wolf-Fontaine, the only tallies of the night for Chicago. And then on Saturday, Dubuque was up 3-2 with a minute remaining. And then Sean Farrell scored from the point, and Mittendorf again in overtime. Or excuse me, not even in overtime. It was at the end of regulation with about 8 seconds left. Chicago blitzed Dubuque in the final 60 seconds. But even though Dubuque lost both of those games, about as close of a series as you could play without at least winning one for the Fighting Saints. And that lends to a lot of excitement and anticipation for this weekend series.
No doubt. The Friday night game, that Mittendorf goal, if I recall correctly, it was a breakaway goal, but I think there was kind of a little bit of a fortunate bounce that really sprung him for that breakaway. And then an empty net goal. So, that was a lot closer game than it probably appeared. And again, the Saturday night game, you allow 2 goals in the final minute of regulation, and you go from winning and getting a nice signature win to losing, so you don't even get a point out of it. And I know they were at least looking at getting a point, but you're right. Chicago really turned it on. I think that entire third period of that second game, they were really dynamic, and really the puck cycling they did in the Dubuque zone was like watching the Harlem Globetrotters. Yeah. Really, they were really moving the puck well, and it was tough for the Fighting Saints to maintain that. But I think a lot of good came out of that weekend for the Fighting Saints. Granted, they were not happy with getting swept, but they realized that the Fighting Saints gave it everything they had, and they just weren't good enough to beat them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that since then they've refocused. I like the response that the Saints have had since that weekend, and they've been playing much better hockey, and I think they've positioned themselves better for the stretch run and for the playoffs because of that weekend and how they had to respond to that weekend.
Yeah, that weekend, those 2 losses, kind of the end of the worst stretch of the season for the Fighting Saints, which started when they came back from the winter break, losing 2 of 3 to Cedar Rapids and then Team USA. And then that following week, they split with Waterloo, and then they lost twice. So it was 5 losses in the span of 3 weekends, which hasn't happened since. And judging by the way the Fighting Saints have played all season, probably won't happen the rest of the season. That series with Chicago, a big one, and we were just looking at the stats. You mentioned the goal differential for Chicago. It's not the team we saw last year for the Steel that had a ton of offensive firepower, but really lacked from the blue line back towards the net. This is a team that is built in all 3 zones as one of the top teams in the league. They have one of the best goaltenders in Victor Ostman. They have a great blue line that jumps up in the rush but also plays pretty solid in their own end. But the biggest key for Chicago is no matter how well you can game plan for them, they still skate better than any team in this league, hands down.
It's amazing how well they skate, and you talked about, like last year we got to see Jack Hughes in Dubuque when he played for Team USA, and what an amazing skater he is. Now, I'm not saying these guys are on that level of Jack Hughes, but it really jumps out at you when you see these teams who skate extremely well, and you can tell that the Steel put a lot of emphasis on skill work and skating in practice, and a lot of these guys have really taken big jumps in the seasons that they've been in Chicago. So I think that's a big part of that. You can tell that they spend a lot of time on that.
Mm-hmm. And that is the biggest key in the sport of hockey right now. The way the game has changed, speed kills, and you see more and more teams getting guys that might not be the biggest on the ice, but they're quick, and tell you what, you can't hit what you can't see, and
exactly.
That's kind of the mentality Chicago has taken the last couple years. And in Dubuque, we saw against the series the first time out, Dubuque's still the lowest number of penalty minutes in the entire league. They took 14 penalties in the 2 games against Chicago, and a lot of those penalties Dubuque doesn't usually take, but when guys are skating as fast, sometimes you just have to reach out and grab onto something, and that's the way Chicago generates so many power play opportunities.
Yeah.
And it's a power play that clicks at 27%.
Exactly, and like you said, they're so quick and so shifty that, you know, if you get caught out of a little possession just a little bit, it's easy to throw a hook out there or a trip out there, and I think that's a big that's a big issue. So I'm sure that's something that the Fighting Saints will address in practice this week, and they'll scheme for it. You know, when they saw him a couple months ago, you know, they really didn't have that exposure. They didn't face any teams like that, with the exception maybe of the U18 team. Well, at that point they hadn't played the U18. So, you know, you don't see teams that really skate that well. So I think they'll be much better prepared for this week's game, and they'll know, you know, I'm sure they'll add some fundamentals and some drills into practice this week that will help them address that, you know, that facing a team that skates as well as they do.
Going to be a very exciting weekend for the Fighting Saints. 2 games against Chicago. This is a month that comes in twos because they have 2 games against Chicago. They have 2 games against Waterloo. They have 2 games against Des Moines. They have 2 against Cedar Rapids, and they have 2 against Youngstown. That's the schedule for the month of March. The weekend after this for Chicago, you have Waterloo, the makeup game here on Wednesday night, and then immediately following, I believe the plan for the Fighting Saints is to hop on a bus and travel through the night to get to Youngstown on Thursday morning, because they play Youngstown Friday and Saturday. That's their longest road trip of the season. And then, as it was last year for Dubuque, very nice the travel that they have the rest of the way. Their longest road trip will be to Des Moines, and that will only be for a single game the following weekend in March. And then once you get to the last weekend in March and the rest of April, they go to Madison twice and they go to Cedar Rapids once. So nice for the Fighting Saints, just like last year. Towards the end of the season, the travel really lightens, and they can maybe get a little bit of rest before the playoffs.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think that a lot of that has to do with being so centrally located within the USHL. You have so many teams that are within a 3.5-hour drive of Dubuque, and you know, and you get those rivalry games. It's, you know, it's easy to drive an hour and a half to those games. But you make a really good point about you're not necessarily getting rest. You know, you're not getting days off and stuff like that. But the fact that you don't have to travel to Youngstown or Fargo or Sioux Falls or Tri-City, you know, it will make your legs that much more fresh. And I think that is an important point down the stretch. You know, I think we saw that last year with the Fighting Saints. They had such a friendly schedule in the second half where they didn't have to travel a lot. You know, I thought they were pretty fresh for that first round playoff series. Now, granted, the second round playoff series, you know, there's such a quick turnaround that they ran out of steam a little bit. But I think they did have some good legs down the stretch because they weren't traveling all the time.
The Fighting Saints are, again, a travel-friendly schedule after these first couple weekends in March. And for Dubuque this weekend against Chicago, Friday night, it'll be Hawkeye night. 3 former Iowa Hawkeye football players in attendance on Friday night, a family 4-pack night. So a bunch of reason outside of maybe one of the best series of hockey that you'll see, and right now very likely to be the Eastern Conference final preview, with those 2 teams running away with the top 2 seeds between Dubuque and Chicago. For those tickets, 563-583-6880 or DubuqueFightingSaints.com. And this will be the last time we see Dubuque and Chicago in the regular season, but something tells me it might not be the last time we see them play hockey this entire season.
No, I don't think so either. I think the way the playoffs are set up, you know, I think both of them obviously are going to get they're pretty well in contention to get that 1 and 2 seed. And the way the playoffs are set up, you know, if you get that first round bye, the teams below you are on a really tough schedule, and you know, playing potentially 6 games in about a week, so they're going to be pretty beat up. So the odds of the Fighting Saints and the Steel making the conference finals are pretty good if they take care of business the way they have, and I don't think, from what we've seen, I don't think there's any reason to think otherwise.
Dubuque and Chicago, big-time hockey Friday night here in Dubuque, Saturday in Chicago, and it's about 2.5 hours to get there to Geneva, Illinois. So last time in Chicago, we saw a couple Dubuque Fighting Saints sweaters. Hopeful to see a couple more, and certainly if that's an Eastern Conference Finals matchup, it'll be nice because both fan bases should be able to travel pretty well and pretty easily between those two cities. Still a long way to go before the playoffs, but you only have to wait a couple more days until you see Dubuque and Chicago here on Friday night. We'll take our final break of the show. When we come back, it's been a long time since we've talked NHL hockey, so we're going to do a little bit of our favorite buy or sell with the NHL here to end this show. Welcome back to the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Milewski joined by Jim Leitner. One final segment for you today, and it's one of our favorites. It's Buy or Sell NHL edition. Again, it's been a while since we've done one of these, so with the playoffs right around the corner in the NHL as well, we have some intriguing topics to discuss, and we'll start off with one of the tightest division races in the NHL. It's the Metropolitan Division. Right now, the Capitals have 86 points, the Flyers are in second with 83, and the Penguins are in third with 80 points. Flyers are 8-2 in their last 10. Buy or sell that Philly wins the Metro?
You started out with the toughest question of all, the ones that you gave me. This was the toughest one of the 4 or 5 that you gave me. I like the way Philadelphia is trending. Like, as you mentioned, they're 8-2 over their last 10, whereas Washington is 4-5-1. I like the way the Flyers are trending, so I'm gonna buy this. I do think they're gonna do it, but on the other hand, I do like how the Capitals, they've won before. I think they're a team that's got pedigree. I think they can win a Stanley Cup this year, but by the slimmest of margins, I'm going to buy this and say that Philadelphia is going to get it done.
You like the Flyers? An interesting pick there. I'm going to have to go against you. I like the one thing that's working for the Flyers right now is that the majority of their games remaining are at home. They are a much better home team than they are a road team. But I still think that inconsistency on the road is what's going to hurt the Flyers. They're 15-15-3 away from home. They're worlds better on home. It must be something in the water in Philadelphia because the Sixers in the NBA only have lost twice at home, and they're 9-22 away from home. So it might just be that Philly's a great city to play in and that they're really homesick when they're away. I don't know what it is.
Or maybe they're scared of their fans. Their fans throw snowballs at Santa Claus.
Yeah, that's actually probably a more logical explanation for it all. I think Chicago, just that the veteran poise. Again, Philly's a young team too, so I think they'll slow down a little bit, lose some road games, and that'll be the difference. But I think right now they're certainly cementing themselves as a top 3 seed in the Metro, not necessarily that wild card where they've sat for most of the year. I like the Caps by about 4 or 5 points once the season rolls around to its conclusion. Looking at the Eastern Conference again, just mentioned the wild card. Right now, the Eastern Conference wild card teams are, again, it's the Islanders and it's the Blue Jackets. Metro is dominating right now in the Eastern Conference in terms of the depth. Buy or sell that both Eastern Conference wild card winners will finish with more points than the Pacific Division winner. Islanders and Blue Jackets have 78 points. Vegas, who's in first in the Pacific, has 80.
I'm going to sell on that one, too. Like Vegas, they're only 2 points up on those two teams, but they've gone 8-2 over their last 10, so they've been on a little bit of a roll. So I'm going to say that I think Vegas will finish ahead of those two teams in terms of points.
Yeah, I'll sell it also. I think the Islanders will be a wild card team, and I think they're going to finish with more points than the Pacific Division winner, but whether it's Carolina or whether it's the Blue Jackets seem like the two likely wild card teams, I think they'll finish just below the Pacific Division winner. But I think the Islanders or the Penguins, they're only 2 points out of a wild card spot. One of those two teams will have more points than Vegas by the end of the year, but I'm selling that both wild card teams will have that. So we look at some individual accomplishments here. Right now, David Pastrnak, 47 goals, leads the league. Alex Ovechkin and Austin Matthews both have 45. Buy or sell that one of them catches fire down the stretch and hits 60 goals on the last day of the season.
And I'm going to sell again on that. There's about 15 games left to go in the regular season, so you're looking at a goal per game, slightly maybe a little bit more than a goal per game. That's a tough pace to be on. So I don't see any of those three getting a goal per game and getting that 60-goal mark.
I'm gonna buy it because you got to believe in something, right? I think I can make a pretty logical case in my head where David Pastrnak gets to 60 goals this season. He needs 13. Like you said, for him, it would be just under a goal per game, which is better than a goal per game. He's on pace for 58, so right now he's not even far off. He's able to catch fire like a lot of these top goal scorers are. He already has a couple hat tricks this season. I think Pasta gets 2 hat tricks down the stretch, and that alone is the difference, and he's able to just hit 60 on the final day of the season. So I got Pastrnak at 60 goals just because of his ability on that Bruins power play to pour in a lot of goals. Another player that's just it's not even really a competition anymore. Leon Draisaitl is starting to run away with the overall points race in the NHL. He's the only player over 100 points. He has 102 for the Oilers. Buy or sell that Draisaitl becomes the first player since 1995-96. That was Mario Lemieux when he had 161 points. Buy or sell that Draisaitl becomes the first to record at least 130 in a season.
I'm going to sell on that one again. I think he's at 102 right now, so he's got 28 points to go. About 15 games left to go, so almost 2 points per game. I think that's a little bit too much. Obviously, he's going to run away with the scoring title, but I don't see that happening. And Edmonton, I don't think is deep enough. You know, like you look at Pastrnak with the Bruins, he's got a lot of good pieces around him, a lot of good balance and scoring depth around him. Draisaitl in Edmonton, you know, other than Connor McDavid, they really don't have a ton of offense around him, so it's easier to key on him, which is going to make it difficult to get 2 points per game.
His pace, he's on pace for 129, so it's very, very close, but I'm also going to sell on this one. I think that he falls into about the 125 range, which would still be a tremendous season. But yeah, I think McDavid's back in the lineup now, which obviously benefits Draisaitl, but I think it also might hurt him just in the sense that if he's not leaned on as heavily, McDavid might snatch a couple of those points. I think Draisaitl will sit about 125, 126, but just fall short of 130.
What a shame that he's
got
125
terrible
points.
Someone that fell 2 points short of 130 last year, Nikita Kucherov, had 128 last season. By his standards, this has been an off year. He has 80 points with 19 games left to play. That means he needs 20 points in 19 games to hit 100 for the third year in a row. Buy or sell that Kucherov gets to 100?
This one I'm buying. I'm buying on Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is a team that, you know, ran away with it last year, and I think they've done a much better job of pacing themselves this year, and they're kind of more finding their stride down to the playoff stretch. So I think, and obviously he's a big engine to that team in offensive, driving that team offensively. So I do think he's going to get, you know, if he just needs to average a point per game, I think it's a lot more likely that he can do it.
Yeah, I'm with you as well. I'd buy it. Again, 80 points through 66 games for him, so he's averaging over a point per game. That means that right now he is on pace to get to 100, and not many guys over the last 10 years have done 100 3 years in a row. It's the Crosbys, that's the Canes, and those are really the only names that you've seen accomplish that feat. So Kucherov would be able to put himself in rarefied air. McDavid has a chance to do it as well this year, to get with 3 straight seasons with 100 points, and he's only 8 points away, I believe, so there's a really good chance he does it. But yeah, I think Kucherov, because of where the Lightning are in the standings, since they actually are still playing for something now, where last year they weren't, they're still within striking distance of Boston for the number 1 seed in the Atlantic Division. I think they're going to push hard. And like you said, Kucherov's one of the engines. So if he goes, the team goes, and I think he's going to be able to put plenty of points on the board and not just get to 100, but surpass it by a decent amount.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch the stretch run here, and the playoffs are always my favorite time of the year too. So it's always fun to see the lead up to that. And, you know, for my money, the first round of the playoffs is more exciting than March Madness. I don't know if a lot of people will agree with me on that. I'm sure a lot of people don't, but the first round, maybe the second round of the playoffs too, they're so exciting. There's so much, it's every night for 2 weeks. You know, upsets, crazy things going on. It's my favorite time of the year, and I do like it better than March Madness, and I love the build-up going into it and trying to get an idea what's going to go on these last month or so.
The playoff races are all within striking distance for those number 1 seeds. The one I'm watching with the most, with most intently, though, is 2 and 3 in the Pacific, please be Edmonton and Calgary, because that
that'd be awesome.
would be a bloodbath
That would
for
be
7
awesome.
games. The Battle of Alberta has been reignited this year, and right now, as of the recording of this show, both of those teams are 2 or 3 in the Pacific Division. So keep rolling, Vegas, and hope hope Vancouver doesn't catch one of those teams and push them to a wild card spot.
Vancouver's been, a pleasant surprise this year. I knew they were a team that was kind of on the rise, but I think they've exceeded expectations so far, and I think that's going to be a team that's got a lot of legs going the next 5-10 years.
It'll be really interesting to see where the playoffs shake out, and as we mentioned, only a couple weeks left before the regular season for the NHL ends, and we see the first round of the playoffs. The first weekend in April is the final weekend of the NHL regular season, I believe, and then we've got playoffs the very following week. So a lot to be excited about, and the Fighting Saints, on the other hand, are not necessarily in as tight of a playoff race, which is totally fine for everyone involved in that locker room right now. But that's all the time we have for the Fighting Saints Report. For Jim Leitner, I'm Jack Milewski signing off. We'll talk to you next Monday after the Fighting Saints take on the Chicago Steel.